welcome to the next episode of Hollywood Squares. I'm just kidding. Welcome to our ongoing series that we've been doing for the last 2 years. It's called The Future of Contingent Workforce in the Changing World. I'm really excited about today. We have amazing guests. In our last segment in the series, we made some big predictions on the past broadcasts and moved from talking about COVID to the impact of the golden age of contingent work. This past January, we discussed the concept of a rolling recession, with the unemployment rate largely remaining the same because of market forces, including Fed rate increases, congressional spending, which is counter to the Fed rate increases, reduction in immigration, the trends towards onshoring and nearshoring, as well as retirement rates outpacing new talent entering the workforce. All this makes things really difficult for wage inflation and basically causes a supply and demand issue. Fast forward 6 months into 2023, we sit with over 270,000 workers laid off, and the unemployment rate remains largely the same. Artificial intelligence has taken the world by storm in the mainstream with the advent of interfaces like ChatGPT and Bard. It has given us all a taste of what's possible, as well as the potential of reducing the workforce inflation through AI and automation. Speaking of that, we thought automation was going to replace lower wage roles, but now we're excited and somewhat worried that AI will be challenging the cognitive worker class. Some analysts are saying it could affect about 25% of overall jobs in the future. Inflation seems to be getting under control. However, the rapid rate of the Fed's increases may have been done too aggressively and could cause an overcorrection. And to make things more complex, we've had several banks fail or be rolled up in the last 6 months and merge to survive. If we look back at the savings and loans crisis in the 80s or the banking crisis in 2008, history has shown us that we've never had an isolated incident. Many hospitality companies are defaulting on billion-dollar mortgages today, and this is happening behind the scenes, leaving banks in a vulnerable position and could rear its head in the next few quarters, and that could be a major catalyst for a slowdown or worse. Now let's talk trajectory. Are we in a faux recession, which is basically a fake recession, or did the recession already happen, or are we at the edge of a recession? Today, we'll be discussing how generative AI, the possible economic slowdown, and other disruptions are impacting the segment of the workforce. Welcome, everybody. We have an amazing group of panelists. Karen Selfers from Contingent Solutions, Global Head of Consumer Products, Life Sciences, and Industrials. Pam Sands, VP of Diversity at Kelly OCG. Teresa Carroll, CEO of Magnet. Bruce Morton, Global Head of Strategy, Allegis Global Solutions. Doug Levy, CEO of Beeline. Jason Ezrati, CEO of Brightfield. And Jennifer Torney, Global VP, Client Experience and Partnership at TapFin Solutions. Welcome, everybody.
Thanks for having us.
So I want to start off, Doug, with you. In January, we made some predictions for 2023. What did we get right and what did we get wrong?
Well, two things. I'm never going to hire as a motivational speaker, so thanks for the intro. There is lots to be happy about in the world. And I don't know why you picked on me because, as you know, I rarely partake in the predictions because they're nothing more than a vehicle for me to display my ignorance. So I don't remember what we predicted. I'm going to pass this on to the smarter folks on the panel and just punt.
Who's that?
Anybody's me, man. Which is hard to figure out.
Didn't we all think that Brian would have a record deal by now? I kind of felt like that was one.
I did have that one. I think he's holding out on us.
Jason, your thoughts?
I predicted that Doug would punt on this question. Mark 1 for yes. I predicted, I think at some point I did predict some weight loss. Now that it's happened, I'd like to say that one has come true as well. The part that I got partially wrong, I think I predicted that now was the time that workforce transformation has hit the C-suite and it's all happening now. I think the conversations have started and the right people are in place. That's still true. Those committees haven't disbanded. But I think some of the timelines, if we thought things were happening, over the next, inside 23, I think some of those more strategic, bigger fisted initiatives are happening a bit longer. And right now, the focus is more tactical around short-term cash realization, hard savings, et cetera.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Brian? I think he's frozen.
Brian wasn't just being stoic. I think he's frozen.
All right, Bruce, you're up.
Yeah, I'll jump in, and I was going to say exactly the same as Jason, but just to pile on that a little bit, I agree that we thought that January, we were starting to have those conversations, which we have, but unfortunately organizations did get more near-term focus, trying to take cost out of the business, cost savings. I think that just like in the previous 18 months, we got caught by the massive uplift of contingent worker demand. I think we got caught a little bit by how fast it slowed down when we came back from Christmas. We didn't see that January bump, and I think the good news is it's sort of bottomed. We're starting to see some gradual, but I think at that change, that we haven't got time for strategy conversations, but they're definitely happening now, I'm glad to say. And I think some organizations are taking what they see as a bit of a holding pattern between now and the end of the year. They've actually got some bandwidth of time to think about it. So, as the market's sort of settled, it's coming back a little bit, but there's no panic about it. We can sort of predict that it's going to be a slow return and a slow recovery. So in the meantime, let's get ready for when there is a recovery. A great example, one of our clients said, I know that come January, when we take off our hiring freeze, our manager's going to go and run out and pay a fortune for people. Can we give them some alternatives to stop them doing that? Because we seem to do that every time. That's a smart thing to do. Let's take this time while we, to think about how do we set up the data to say, hey, there's a different way of doing that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so speaking of that kind of brings us to the next question.
Wait, I have some predictions.
Okay, go for it.
I wasn't here in January. So I watched the panel yesterday. By the way, if I talk funny, it's because I have COVID. But I watched the panel yesterday, and my predictions would be that I was wrong on the fact that I would stay semi-retired. I'm no longer semi-retired. That's one prediction I would have made in January. The second one, I'm going to build on what Doug said from what I listened to. There's not as much innovation now that I'm coming back into the industry full time after about three and a half years. I'm not seeing as much innovation or disruption. So Doug called it a lethargic industry. And I would say that's a prediction that I probably would have been right on back in January.
Oh, wow.
Thank you for letting me say that. And I'm sorry I sound like Elmer Fudd.
No, I think it's great. I mean, and I think it's good part of our conversation today, because I think we are going to talk about some innovations. Jen, did you have any thoughts as well?
Me? Well, I think that it's already been said, but I didn't expect us to see the downturn that we've seen this year, the slowing, the cautious slowing, where there's a lot of Me Too, and, hiring is kind of slowing, is a lot more cautious. And then, of course, what I did know, I kind of expected anyway, is that a lot of organizations were going to be going out to tender, and over COVID, there was a lot of hold on that. There was so much focus on other parts of the business and reaction to mandates and what have you. And we've definitely seen a lot of organizations going out to bid, which is good and bad, right? Depending on which side you're on. But overall, I think this year has proven to be yet another surprise.
I would add to that.
Am I back in the conference now, Ashish?
You are.
Yeah.
You are.
All right. I could hear all of you, but apparently I was in cyber limbo land. If we get from my end, if we go back, I think I had talked about the fact that we were in quote unquote a split screen economy. There was general slowdown, but the labor market hadn't caught up to that yet. And so fast forwarding, I'm feeling a little bit prescient in that prediction. Although unemployment rate is still really low, I think we're going to see more cracks in the labor market. If we look at what's happening, the pace of job additions has slowed back to 2020 levels, which we haven't seen in a while. So I think we're going to be in for a little bit of a rough ride this year, maybe into early 2024. Bruce, as you talked about stabilization, we are seeing some of that, but I don't think it's going to be a hockey stick kind of growth curve coming out of this from a jobs perspective.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, do you guys feel like our economic policy tends to be very extreme? We overcorrect and then we go the other direction, we overcorrect. Like we've kind of laid off a lot of people this year, but it's sort of self-fulfilling. Like we're saying we're gonna have a recession, so we're trying to build that recession case, essentially, but we're not at the recession standpoint.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I don't think it's even speculation. We see this pendulum swing hard one or the other, and we're always correcting, playing catch up for the actions that were taken prior. So it'd be great to get out in front of that, but I don't think those are our levers to pull.
True. Looking at order volumes, have you all seen a stabilization in demand? Have you seen rates increase or decrease or stabilize? And where do you think the second half is going to be with the job market?
We've seen week over week, and I say this very cautiously optimistic, but we've seen order volumes and headcount slowly start to creep back up instead of retracting, which is really encouraging for the business. I still am seeing kind of quite a bit of varying degree of the rates changing. It really is dependent upon the client and what they're doing, what business they're in. We've seen some very forward-thinking clients really look at sort of optimizing their rates to make sure that they're in line with what's happening in the marketplace. Some people are wanting to do that really frequently, and then others that are just absolutely backed into a corner and are not willing to budge, and that's been really challenging.
Yeah, I was actually going to add that I don't know, I feel like we're painting a bleak picture, and I would agree with that in terms of layoffs in the tech segment in particular, as we all know. But I would equally say in other industries, consumer products, life sciences, even industrials, broad-based, and I'm talking specifically blue collar roles now, not necessarily white collar, we've never seen a slowdown. So we haven't called that out. I think that's an important point to make. And so I would agree with you, Chen. Clearly, either we have not seen a slowdown or we see stabilization in those areas that have seen a slowdown. That's encouraging for the second half. In terms of rates, I have to say, I'm more in the camp of there's more to be done by many clients to stay competitive.
Oh, yeah.
Where we haven't yet successfully convinced that rates need to go up because otherwise you're not competitive, we're making some progress. So I see rates continuing to creep up. I don't see them going down.
Yeah, Karen, I'm with you on that, and I think there's a direct correlation between looking at rates are what we pay to the worker and what's happening to inflation around us as well.
Right.
Sometimes that's left out of the conversation, and I also agree. I think what we see here, Ashish, is that it's also very what we're seeing based on our area of specialty, right? Where our areas of focus are. I think if I would have had a prediction, I would have been on the call in January. I would have probably said we need to pay close attention to those companies that are pandemic darlings that saw a huge increase in talent, and that's where we're seeing some of the retraction. But also, healthcare continues to be strong. Government continues to be strong, right? Other areas that colleagues have mentioned continue to be strong. But I think we've got to continue to lead the conversation for what are those environmental factors around us that are influencing how we continue to attract talent competitively in the market.
Absolutely.
It's a little bit of a double-edged sword, though, isn't it? So as you talk about continued upward pressure on wages, and in particular for long-term employees, and given the past cycles, employers being more willing to hang on, they don't want to go through that cycle. It's a double-edged sword in that that continues to put upward pressure on wages, and that's one of the things that the Fed is looking at when they're making the decisions. Do we continue to ramp up rates? And so the stronger the job market stays, the more likely we're going to see rates continue to go up, which puts overall pressure on the economy. So it's definitely one to watch and see. But the strength of the wage gains, the persistent strength of the wage gains that are reflected in the bill rates, et cetera, are one of the things that are absolutely impacting that decision cycle as it relates to rates and the overall economy.
Yeah, absolutely. Teresa, are you seeing a volume stabilization?
Actually, what I'm looking at is a little different than what I'm hearing. Is there's still thousands and thousands of open orders out there. So
millions.
I know there always is. So I'm trying to figure out, is there more now than there was, a year or two ago? But also, we have a sizable business in the healthcare space. So lots of interesting things going on in healthcare where I call it a balloon animal. So if you don't mind, I'll be the balloon animal person. Years ago, people squeezed on the full-time headcount, and then they put it into an MSP as of the mid-90s. We started getting visibility into that spend. Now the MSP has all this visibility into these wages and all these increases, so they're getting squeezed and saying, we got to reduce costs in our staff aug spend, and it's going over to the statement of work. And in healthcare, that's coming back to full-time now because of what they squeezed in the full-time and used all the travelers. They spent a lot of money on travel nurses, and as you can see with COVID, they spiked very high, and now they're saying, should we be hiring more full-time? So I guess what I'm seeing is there's orders across all three categories. We just don't know if our orders are being inflated or reduced based on strategies that might be focusing on the other two areas, full-time and statement of work.
Interesting. Jason, what are you saying?
Yeah, a couple of points to follow. I think one, referring to hospitals and everyone's reactions to COVID. I think we now that we're a few years past, maybe we're forgetting the insane bolide effect that COVID had on the economy. We shut down the global economy. Supply chains everywhere got disrupted. So the idea that we're having ripple effects now from that is unsurprising, and the fact that we'd be seesawing after all the government actions that happened and everything. So for sure, we're still reacting to all of those things. And in the healthcare space, I mean, those travel nurses came in because we needed them. I mean, hospitals did not have the ratios they needed to deal with this crisis. In terms of the trends, it's important on webinars like this and in blog posts to talk in trends because we only get so much space to talk. But like trends are like soup. You're trying to taste it all in one spoonful, in one bite, but it has a lot of constituent parts. And I think if you break down what are individual companies doing within this, it's a very mixed bag. And then within a company, position by position, location by location, it's a very mixed bag. And so you will see increases in hiring. You will see rate increases that have to be along with all of the others. So to me, the trick for program managers is to be looking under the microscope across all of those opportunities and not trying to make business decisions on a trend, make business decisions based on what's under the microscope.
And that's the beauty of our industry. It's so complex.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of ways to look at it. And if you get it down to the individual company and what their strategy is, our job is to help them execute that strategy.
Yeah, and jumping on like what Jason and Tracy just said, like basically the trends and also you're seeing variations in demand. Bruce and Doug, do you guys feel like, barring economic collapse with the commercial banking sector, if we don't have that, do you think AI is going to start another race, a race to get to hire again?
In terms of the need for resources to work on AI or AI enabling more?
The resources to get to build the tools.
I don't know necessarily because, look, back to Jason's analogy, and I'm going to mix metaphors, but the soup's still down 13%. And so I think we're so desirous of optimism, and I can look to February and see a stabilization as well. Having said that, early terms are down, which is good, but it's not precipitous. So at the end of the day, we're still worse off than we were last year. New orders are way down from prior year. I mean, like precipitously down. So there would have to be, in my mind, a massive, massive push and need for AI type resources to correct this. And again, I'm just sort of pessimistic in the industry at large. I think shiny objects is society. And so ChatGPT comes out and everybody starts saying all the jobs are going to go away, et cetera. But AI is about predictions, right? It's not about decisions. And there's still a lot of decisions that are involved in hiring people, right? It's people, not pens. So look, I don't want to be the curmudgeon here. Maybe my age is forcing me into that role, but I'm still just somewhat pessimistic that we're going to see these massive changes anytime soon. So no, I don't think that's the great impetus for a turnaround.
Well, and Doug, we've never seen it. I mean, we've talked about SOW for how long, and it's like
exactly
finally it's become a part of anybody's typical program. Direct sourcing took forever. We're finally seeing people really adopt, and it's like we can talk about this all day long, but we're all still kind of messing around with our free ChatGPT to write a job description, right?
Yeah.
So I do think it's going to take a while. I mean, the reality is there's going to be a long way for us to get to a place where it is commonplace to be able to just go out and hire an AI engineer. I mean, they're just not coming out of school with that education.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a stretch. So that upskilling component is going to be critical.
And I think the challenge that we have is that oh, sorry, go on.
Just real quickly, I wouldn't even know how to evaluate these people. So, and I think it's more than just having data science acumen. I think domain expertise is absolutely critical. And again, throwing a bone to Jason, that's why I work with Whitefield, because they understand the industry, but they also have the acumen. And so I think it's going to be, organizations like Jason's that'll do very well versus this massive hiring for people that we don't even know how to hire or what they're doing for us. Sorry, Bruce, go ahead.
I was going to say that the challenge we have is we keep getting these new base levels that we don't quite understand. So, 10 years ago, we all started talking about automating, robots are coming, jobs are going, and now we're using it. I mean, we have over 10 million actions that happen by robots that were happening by people a year ago. So, but that's just another level now of what our organization should look like. How many people do you need in your shared service center? What type of skills do you need? And they add AI to the mix, and who knows what the base level of an organization can look like in 2 years' time. So I don't think we should be talking about more jobs, less jobs. It's more about what does an organization look like to be operating in its most efficient and effective way. And that's constantly evolving. And when people try and compare, which we do, like, we compare this year, we can't compare it to last year. That's not fair. So let's compare it to 2019. That doesn't make sense either. Having year-on-year comparisons of what did we do in July of 2019 or it's definition of madness in my book. The world's constantly moving. How do we measure how well we did this month based on this month? Stop trying to compare it to something where it was a completely different world. It was pre-COVID. Anyway, I'll get off my soapbox, but hopefully you get my point.
Just to reinforce that, I've been around long enough. We didn't know that there was such a thing as a YouTube influencer at some point in time. Or even a software engineer, which is really us. Yeah. There's just never been something in my early career. So,
what's a YouTube influencer? I don't know that term.
You have kids.
That's my daughter. She wants to do that when she grows up.
Ryan, that's because you're a LinkedIn influencer.
Just joking. No, I will say I want to do a quick nod to Bruce, because I think he's making a very salient point. Right? It's not about what jobs do they eliminate, et cetera. It's how it changes, and it will change, and we've seen that over and over again. The net effect with every major technology breakthrough has been more jobs, just of a different type. So as we think about it and apply it to this industry, we're going to have the opportunity, given automation, given AI tools, given the overall developments in our digital skill set, to focus on different areas and bring new areas of value, pull different levers. We don't know what all of those are yet. And that's, what did we do today? What are we doing tomorrow? Those are the right things to look at. So I actually look at it as a benefit to our industry and a real chance for us to continue to evolve the platform. But we're all learning it together, and where we're going to be a year from now, 2 years from now, I don't know. Ash, that's one prediction I'm not willing to make.
Yeah, Brian, I agree with you on that. And what Bruce said as well is that when we look in the rearview mirror, we're not looking at where we're going and how are we taking that futuristic look at the talent that we need and the technology that we're working with, and believe those predictions that we're hearing as well. And then how do we work towards that? Just like we've said, some things that didn't exist before. I mean, 10 years ago, we couldn't order a lift on our phone, right? And those jobs didn't exist. So as we look forward, how are we looking at that and asking imagine if questions instead of what did we do before?
I was saying, Ash, in terms of how ChatGPT and generative AI is just impacting our space overall. In my opinion, if AI was not already on your roadmap, I don't know why this would necessarily be the cause to have it on your roadmap. And so, if this is what's inspiring someone to finally get their brain there, great. But I think that's the vast minority of it. Where I think the bigger impact is not necessarily bringing in so many more jobs, but it's a big switch in how people are thinking. And so I'll go back 20-something years to e-business. Remember when everyone was suddenly hiring for this internet craze and .com and e-business, and we have to rethink all these jobs. And for me, that's a great boon for gig workers, contingents, short-term thinking of repositioning, and all of a sudden the confetti fell and We now call them engineers, and it feels pretty conventional again. I see this doing the same kind of thing. We're going to have to rethink what does it mean to think about prompts. We're going to have to rethink what does it mean to interact with data rather than just doing straight code, linear coding like that. But I don't think it's going to replace jobs. That would presume that we already know how much work there is to do. There's so much more work that we have to do. Let the machines do some. There's still plenty for the humans to be doing, of course.
Yeah, and doing the sum, like that's the thing, right? Because it doesn't have to wholesale change. And you can say, let's use a chatbot to get better and faster candidate feedback after interview. Let's use, a way for us to quickly whip together a job description or some matching technology. I mean, some of it's really basic, but having to implement that and actually using it, not just talking about it, like that's going to have to come far before we start replacing jobs.
No, absolutely. But I would also kind of ask you guys this, since we're in this environment right now where we don't know what's going to happen with the economy, we need flexible staffing needs. We also don't care where they work for the most part, and then how they get paid. Are you seeing your clients leverage you more on the strategy side with contingent labor and just the whole talent mix versus the past?
I think, we've been discussing this over the last couple of sessions that we've had, and I really don't see anything deterring the C-suite from that discussion. That continues, in my opinion, to be one of the top discussions in the boardrooms is, how do we look at the workforce? Do we look at the total workforce, external, permanent workforce? And how do we make sure we stay attractive for our workers, be that location-wise, hybrid work? Our clients ask us, what are the skills we need to hire for the future? So, that I don't think that discussion goes away because the overall issue of scarcity of talent hasn't gone away. Despite the recession, despite, we discussed it earlier, wage inflation is still here. So talent continues to be a top topic, and it's not about, let's reduce costs or anything like that.
Interesting. So cost is starting to be secondary.
It continues to be secondary. It continues. The fear of not having the right skills in the organizations for what their strategic agenda is, or the fear of not being competitive enough to attract the right talent is bigger than where can I save the last penny, I would argue.
Well, there's
I think there's an element of that. Go ahead, Jen.
No, go ahead. Sorry, I was just blurting out.
As was I. I think there's an element of that, but there is cost consciousness, and I say cost, not price, and we all know the difference. So I totally agree, Karen, and it goes to Bruce's earlier point about retaining talent, recognizing that endless cycles of hiring and firing are good for anyone, and it ends up costing the business more in the long term. But at the moment, there is a cost consciousness, and I think that's what we're seeing in those jobs reports, and we're seeing when Doug's talking about new requisitions, new placements being precipitously down. They're investing in the resources they have and retaining those resources. The cost play is on new engagements going forward, and the jobs report, the pullback reflects that cautiousness, and I think we'll see more of that cost cautiousnness, but hopefully with a little bit more enlightenment that it's not just cut now, save a penny, and we'll be better in the long run. We have to be very deliberate about where we're spending the money right now. I mean, investing in the people that we have for the sake of new hires going forward.
Well, I think we just need to change the narrative, though, because we tend to we got this stranglehold on whatever scope is inside the MSP, and we're trying to squeeze the pennies out of the rate. And there's so much more. There's so much more to look at than rates and the way you're buying and how you're bringing in talent and strategic workforce planning at the high level. But, I think even with rogue spend, most organizations have it. Look there. Look to see if you can put in an SOW program. There's so many ways to get those numbers. And I think we have to really constantly be educating people that it's not doing them any good to reduce those rates beyond where they are.
I think to be another blurter, sorry. I think we get this visual. First of all, I totally agree, and I think we get this visual that we're beating up everybody to find these savings. That if the average is 60, I got to get this to, for 10% savings, I have to get this to 54, and everyone is going to go down. And I come about it a little bit differently. I think the low-hanging fruit is, where was the spending in excess? Where were there unnecessary premiums? You know, perhaps you're pricing SOW contracts at a market high and you're still paying those. And at that point, you needed the talent that badly, and maybe it was a great business decision to pay at that market high for those types of arrangements. Perhaps markets have changed, and now we reverse those tables. And for me, that's the best, and not to beat up everybody and to think about squeezing every penny necessarily. It's, where is the egregious spending most egregious? Start there. And usually you can attain some great goals just with that in scope.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, fully agree with you, Jason. And I think the other thing is we're in these conversations a lot and we're sharing our insights, but I think it's the opportunity for us to ask some better questions. And one of those is, what's the impact of that squeeze on your primary supplier and your supply chain? Because when those squeeze happens within the supply chain, what you're doing is you're eating into capital that's there for innovation for the future, which is actually what you really need from your supply chain. And it has that ripple effect. So I think there's also the opportunity for us to really be thinking about the questions we need to be infusing into the conversation, as well as the comments.
And just to add on that, and maybe it's a question for the group, isn't it also about, it's first of all our job to speak to the right stakeholders in these organizations and have the right dialogue. So this continued trend of contingent labor moving more into the HR space, plus also involving the business, to me is super critical. So it's on us too to lead the conversation in the right direction and steer away from the procurement talk, so to speak, and look at the bigger picture, where talent should be the focus. And at the end of the day, also, what is the outcome we want to achieve with these organizations?
Yeah, and I think the challenge that some organizations are having, that, and I agree with you, Karen, is that the HR is starting to get in, but they're starting with staff org. And at the same time, coming back to Teresa's balloon animal, that's being squeezed and is going to services. HR trying to control services procurement spend is just like, it's imagination, because it's owned by the business, it's owned by the individual business leaders. So I think that's the challenge we're going to have. And hopefully that doesn't, because I think we're all seeing the movement to now more and more organizations want to pay on the outcome. They don't want to pay on the input, right? They want to just pay to get the work done. So, I think one of the challenges we might have going forward is HR want to be in this space and control it, and that will send services even further away. So I think that's something that, your point, Karen, we have to be having the right conversation, asking the right question with the right level of stakeholder to educate them that saving $6 on a $60 an hour person is not what it should be about. It's about organization design and how you're getting work done. That's where you're going to save you millions. But,
and the macro picture, I don't think we talk about the macro picture enough. Supply and demand is the worst it's ever been in my career. And supply and demand drives what? Wages, but it also drives choice. Choice for where people want to work, choice with where the suppliers want to put the talent. So if procurement's coming in with some penny talk about how do we save pennies on somebody, I think our conversation needs to be more about what's going to happen as a result of squeezing on that part of the balloon when you do that, because the best way to reduce pennies is to automate the work. And if you're not prepared to automate the work, then it's going to get done. It's just maybe not going to get done in your bucket.
Absolutely. That's a great point.
I would say procurement loses credibility when they show up with Hunt's ketchup when everyone wants Heinz. You can't save money at all costs.
Yeah. And I don't like ketchup, so just automate it.
But I also think, like from a hiring standpoint, I think right now Wall Street's rewarding cutting costs, right? And at some point, so that means good news, like more people working, is bad news for the stock market, right? And that's affecting management's decisions. But I think when good news is actually good news, and you're hiring again, I think you'll start seeing these budgets open up, because it drives behavior, right? Like compensation. So I think that shift could happen pretty quickly at some point. In terms of, like, we hear all this buzz about AI and direct sourcing, so I wanted to kind of go through that a little bit. Jason, it's sort of a marketing tool at this point in terms of what it's being represented as, more so than what's like how it's helping productivity. So where do you see this going, and what are some of the low hanging things people can do to capitalize on this in the short term while this technology gets more advanced? And
I think for candidate attraction, the low-hanging fruit for sure is around marketing. It's just another form of direct marketing for those of you old enough to have used that term. Sorry, my computer blinked out. And then again, for those of us that have had various forms of AI on our roadmaps already, what for us, this is doing a lot to the back end, things that aren't necessarily interacting with people, but shrinking things that we otherwise would have to build that large language models get to shrink for us. And so I think there's a lot of just efficiencies on how unstructured data gets handled, a lot less that we have to build at the app layer, and it's more about plugging things together. So that's, for me, the most exciting. Being able to emulate this human interaction, I think, is still in the marketing space and customer support space for the most part, which for sure there's a lot of that opportunity in regular staffing. In our space, what we're most excited about is helping the requisitioner find the right place in their path. Should I be hiring a full-time worker? Should I be going down an S&W path? Should it be staff aug? That type of interaction has failed with the old school tree diagrams. Mm-hmm. So having a more natural interaction with someone who's inherently biased is what we're excited about.
So it's helping you with the decision-making process, but not actually taking over the decision-making process.
For sure. Exactly.
And Bruce, how are you guys applying it, or where do you see it going?
Well, I think it's to add on to what Jason was saying, it's the predictability that we're going to get from AI. So if you do these things, so it used to be based on your requirement, decision tree, you should be staff or you should be perm or you should be SOW. Now it's, and by the way, this is the effect of you not making that decision or making this decision. If you make decision A, this is going to happen. If you make decision B, this will happen. So I think it's that predictability where AI really comes to bear, because it has the amount of data that you can make sense of in a consumerized way, and getting it to the point of sale. So that's what we're doing with our partnership with Brightfield. Is the olden days of a couple of years ago, you'd go to your labor market folks and say, can you do me analysis on this market, please? And 48 hours later, you get a nice PDF. Now you can do it in the intake session, right? Because you have your 48 hours is fast. So it's getting it to the point of sale is the key to it. I think that's where we're going to see a lot of advances.
Definitely. Doug, how are you in your systems?
Yeah, similarly, I think for me, it's more around optionality. So perhaps as a buyer, I'm naive about certain things, right? There's this path that I'm accustomed to going down, and I've already referenced this, but we're working with Jason on the front end. And so we've always had our did you knows, but this takes it to a whole new level, right? So whether we're even talking about going to a different path, SOW, gig, whatever, that's one thing. But even within the path of contingent, as you brought it up, now we don't care so much about remote ability, right? Before we'd have to pull a report and start looking at rates in different locations. And now, we're able to say, hey, you've got options. Have you thought about going into this location if you're worried about rates, or if it's about a skill set? We have a higher propensity for sourcing those types of AI folks in this region. So I think it's more about added insights at this point, and that's how we're thinking about incorporating it.
Do you also think it could be like a better way to do compliance and risk management within organizations?
100%. But I don't want to give away any secret sauce because Teresa's on the phone. So,
and not all the people watching.
Does this look like I'm looking at Teresa in the Hollywood Square?
Exactly. Oh, okay. The other way.
100%. When we think about banking, you go on vacation and all of a sudden you get this text that, did you really make this credit card purchase? I mean, that's AI saying, look, something looks a little bit out of whack. I think we're going to see the same thing applied from a compliance perspective in the years to come. And I think that'll be of immense value to the enterprise.
Yeah, especially the laws changing locally everywhere. It's hard to keep up to make sure you're doing the right things.
Yeah.
Karen, any thoughts around this?
Oh, sorry, I had to unmute. Yeah. No, I agree with comments made here. I think the other angle to think about is also education internally within our own organization, right? Like how making sure that we we have rules around where and how we can use ChatGPT or other AI. And be compliant, by the way, right? Like, I think that's also an interesting topic that we have a lot of discussions internally, and making sure we have good standard internally on how to utilize it. Otherwise, I see it as others have said, but I see it primarily utilizing AI to further increase automation, like we all do, right? And that should benefit our clients. Will it? Again, I agree. Also, it won't replace people's jobs. It'll create new jobs, different jobs, and we should get value out of speed and whatever have you in applying AI.
When I mentioned this on the last one, but I think we're starting to see more regulation around ChatGPT and using AI in a lot of different ways. And I think, whether it's the US, Italy, I know Europe has a lot of things underway to really evaluate what is not going to create an unlawful situation where people are being discriminated against or what have you. And so that's also really interesting, because here's another one where we're thinking ChatGPT and AI might be enormous, but we might find that it ends up being a big pain to navigate, in different countries. I don't know. It's interesting to watch it all come out.
Yeah, that's where I was actually alluding to, Jen, right? Like we may be allowed to utilize it here in the US differently than what the rules are across Europe. Another thing is, you utilize ChatGPT for input. Are people aware that there might be plagiarism? What you have to, I don't know. There's a whole bunch of things to think about as we learn. And we all said it before. It's probably, we're going to learn, and it's going to take us a lot of time to really get to the end state, which probably won't be for many years.
Go ahead. I was just going to offer a bit of a moment of optimism here, in that, in particular for our industry and what we do, I think that there's a lot of opportunity. And yes, things are I already said, we're going to be learning. I think they're very fair points from Karen and Jen. But it's interesting that you brought up compliance as an example. And to the comment earlier about, eventually you get to a decision point. Big decisions, at least as it stands today, we want to own. But there's a lot of transactional activity involved in recruitment. Compliance is the perfect example. And those are small decisions. They fit a tight education matrix. And so those opportunities to take away the mundane, the small decision points, the transactional nature, actually is huge opportunity for our industry and where we support our customers. How it applies to ultimate selection, where there could be bias in AI, et cetera. Yet we got a long ways to go, and those big decisions we're probably going to want to own for some time to come. But as we charge forward over the next couple of years, and we think about what happens with what we manage and execute against, there's a lot that's ripe to leverage AI and machine learning tools.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, I mean, my personal experience with our own internal team is like, look, ultimately, if the unemployment rate's 3.5%, then no matter what you do, it's about the relationships you build with the candidates, right? And so if we're taking away things like write-ups and putting stuff in the system, and we can let AI tools do that for us, then we're spending more time curating that talent and building the relationships, and that's kind of our competitive advantage. That's how we're looking at it. It's like, look at the supply chain and see what we can automate. That's low levels, non-relationship building tasks.
Yeah, and we're doing the same thing inside our company. What's the friction we're creating between the worker and the work that can be removed through automation? And in particular, we've optimized
Great way to say it.
Yeah, we've optimized a lot of things as an industry, but we've optimized it in pieces and parts. Now we need to look across.
Yeah, and as we look across that, right, and not forget, it's an or. It's not an AI technology and contingent workers. It's an and. The contingent workers are going to be working with this technology, and AI themselves, they're engaging with it, right? So as we think about this on a future perspective, and we've already touched on compliance and risk out there a little bit, but as we look at the future of the contingent workforce and the complexity of our world that we're in, and really paying attention to those macro trends, it's also looking at what's happening in those regions around us. And I know that's one of the things you were interested in talking about today as well, Ashish, is that what are the political and the economic and the legal and the environmental implications going on in the regions where we all do work and operate? And how is that also influencing not only these technology conversations, but how we engage with talent, how we look at like equal pay initiatives as well.
And the other thing you have to kind of like, there's all these. Absolutely. And you brought up a good point. So the other thing is like the systemic plagiarism. Like, how do I know you did what you did? Now that you have AI, we have to have tools to sort of validate whether the person actually did the job they said they're doing, or wrote the script that they said they wrote.
I think you guys are bringing up.
Let's move on to
really, I want to key in, and Pam said, and also Brian's. I love what you're saying, and you as well, Teresa. I think what would be interesting to me is if we kind of came together and helped our buyers, our industry, understand where we think it makes sense and where it doesn't. Because I think you're probably all suffering some of the frustrations I am, where you have some ancillary players who are going to just market the hell out of this and say we're AI first, we're AI driven. Like, what the hell does that even mean? And I think we've got to do a better job helping our buyers ask that, like, what's your data model? What's it comprised of? How are you training the machines? Like, ask how, right? We don't do that. We're like, oh my God, their data, that's so cool. I heard this ChatGPT thing and these guys are AI driven. I want to go do that. Like, put the brakes on, man. Let's start thinking about what really makes sense. Let's walk before we crawl. And as you guys are all talking, and I'm realizing there's great alignment here, and we're dealing with people again, right? So it's so different from other, I think, industries. It'd be kind of cool if we came together and said, here's where we think it makes a lot of sense for the first couple of years. Perhaps there's potential down the road here, but anyone who's telling you elsewise, just be really circumspect at this point in time, because you could end up in a lot of danger.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think that area that Teresa, you were touching on, I think, people used to choose, particularly in the LI blue collar level, they used to like to say, I work for that company, whatever it says above the door. Now it's whoever's got the best app. So I can wake up in the morning and say, yeah, I'm going to go there. One swipe on there, another swipe on pay. Yeah. That's the competitive advantage on a consumer experience, right? And that's where we should be using this tech. That's.
So Doug, are you starting a council?
What's that?
Are you starting a council or consortium around this?
You've already done it.
I predict somebody on this panel will, and I'm looking at her.
Did I do it right? Don't make me laugh.
All right, next topic, direct sourcing, because I know that's been front and center this year. It's a big buzzword. Everyone's using it. I knew what it was 4 years ago, but now I'm not sure what it is anymore. So can you help me define it? Anyone want to take a crack at what direct sourcing is today?
I would argue even back then it had many definitions, but go ahead. Someone feel free to give their favorite definition for today.
I say it's master vendor with cool technology.
Sorry, I'm going to write that down. Say it again.
Back when we were doing master vendors, if you could get the customer to let you use your brand, it was golden.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, that's where I would call it the latter part.
I agree. It's perfectly said.
It's recruiting with your customer's brand versus your own.
Yeah, I call it contingent RPO.
Yeah, I think honestly, it's like we're back to where we were with total talent management. There's like 5,000 different definitions. None of them are wrong per se, but it's sort of like a continuum. Like how advanced do you want to get? Do you have technology or do you not? Do you have curation partners or do you do it internally? Are you using it as a tier 0 or an omni-channel kind of entry point? I feel like there's so much to it. And frankly, some people are just doing kind of an RPO for contingent, and they're just wrapping it around sort of what seems right for their organization. But I don't know that there's a right definition, like right or wrong meaning.
Well, I think the intent and the definition probably isn't that different from what we all think. I think how it's being executed may have a lot of variances. As we think about direct sourcing, it's obviously going direct to the talent. I think, Teresa, that's really, I love your definition. I mean, the dirty little secret is, yeah, we throw in technology, but it's typically still going to some staffing entity, maybe with less brick and mortar, but it's still staffing, right? But I think when we think about the future, we do think more about marketplaces and direct relationships, Bruce, to your point, with the consumer relationship with the talent. And perhaps the technology isn't necessarily ready for that today. And maybe these marketplaces haven't been put together. And I still don't think you're ever going to have one massive one. I still believe there'll be myriad marketplaces based on geography, skills, et cetera. But we are going in that direction. And so I still think there will be a day when direct sourcing, at least how I see it, is comprised of some of the master vendor, because that could very well make sense, but also open environments and marketplaces where we are actually interacting directly with the talent.
And Jib, just based on your experiences over the last 4 years, where have you seen it be effective and where hasn't it worked?
Sorry, was that to me?
Sure.
You're cutting in and out.
There's almost a black market of direct sourcing that's been around forever, and now
A black market.
Now we call it Upwork or one of those similar freelance management systems, right? This isn't new. People used to go direct to people as long as you could find someone and pay them direct. That's what all the freelancers do. When we define freelance being something different, gig workers, staff org, now direct sourcing. Isn't this just people that the company just say, hey, I want to come and pick up that project, and how do I get paid? So, and Doug's behind it, typically there's a staffing firm anyway, so you could argue that it's just low-cost staffing.
There's
so you're calling it pre-identified master vendor.
There's a sophistication and a partnership with the organizations, TA, their job boards, and the sophistication with which, like, you're leveraging AI, or you're leveraging SMS, or you're leveraging RPO sort of candidate marketing and attraction specific for that client. So it kind of takes everything a few steps further if you're really doing it the way it's, going to deliver the best results, in my opinion. But I think, again, it's like, it's a continuum, and it's not very different than what you're talking about, Bruce, really.
Yeah. Patrice, I'd add to that, it's master vendor with tech with a discount.
Yeah.
Like pre-identified,
depending on how you market.
Right. But can we all agree that it's really nothing more than just an additional sourcing channel? It's an addition to, and I mean,
totally
we've talked
agree.
about it for so many years, right? Like, and it seems to be this big hype, but if we all go back and look how much do we actually source through this channel, I would argue in many cases still low single digits, let's be honest. Maybe different in the UK in because it's a different definition, very different. But other than that, I don't understand the hype around it. For me, it's an additional channel and not much bells and whistles more.
Well, and you might have, I always say,
I think you just cut through it.
You have like a direct sourcing solution like we were talking about. And then you might also have like an Upwork, or you might also have, and it's, if you have the right structure and an entry point, like a front door to your talent strategy and your channels, then like that could totally work. There's no reason why you have to have the enterprise-wide. Some of this stuff is crazy where you're hearing about organizations that have 85%, 90% of their workforce going, they're all coming in through direct sourcing, and or they're, not employee workforce through direct sourcing. Most aren't in that bucket, right? Most aren't there. And that's
let's go back to what you're both saying. So basically, in an ideal program, where have you seen, like, how much of the percentage is direct sourcing versus using regular staffing vendors in the overall strategy? And
there's an ideal.
Given that,
I don't think there's an ideal,
because I think that's realistic. Like 90% probably doesn't work because you're essentially creating a single point of failure, right?
Well, then you just have internal sourcing almost. It's almost like you have your own TA organization doing everything. But some are reporting that they do.
I agree, and that's why I kind of hate the term best practices, because it's specific to the organization, right? So for one, it's 80%. For another, it's 3%. But I'll share something. There's a lot of behavioral elements to this as well. And my partner's on the phone, and we have a client that the executives want it, but it's not working the way they want it to. And so when we interviewed the people on the ground, they're like, look, I bring somebody in from direct sourcing. I can't associate them with Tech or Adecco or any of those guys. It's just they came in and they fail. And who do you think gets blamed? Me, the MSP, sitting at the desk every single day. And that's an important consideration, because this goes back to sort of that whole thing around AI and decision making and predictability, et cetera. And so it's still a human element. And so if that doesn't work for the MSP, it's not going to work in the program at large. And so I think there's specific roles that work really well for certain clients, but I don't think there's an ideal. I think it has to be very bespoke to that client and what their needs and their labor classes are comprised of.
I think,
Doug, I think it's interesting you said client and role.
Oh, go on. Sorry, Brian.
Oh, Brian?
Go on, Brian. Oh, you're on mute now.
You're on mute now.
You're still
Brian,
on
you're
mute.
on mute.
You're on mute. No.
Bruce muted him.
I was going to say, on a positive, it's a great channel to increase diversity. I think that's a real positive address.
Yes.
So
Yes.
Definitely.
finish that section on a positive.
I'm with you on that, Bruce. I think it's a great opportunity not only to leverage diversity, but to really reach out and look at under-leveraged talent pools and those that have barriers that we haven't reached before as well, and really consolidate that to have a greater impact.
So Ash, I'm going to.
I don't know who put me on mute, but it wasn't me.
I've just been building an
AI.
AI here to do that, Brian.
It was the AI that Jason put through. Teresa, you're saying?
I was just saying, I'm going to throw a curveball. I'm hoping this next panel, whenever it is, first of all, if I get invited back, I'd love to talk about where are we going to find future supply.
Mhm.
Like, I think that, like Elon Musk tweeted before he owned Twitter, he tweeted that that's the existential crisis is what's happening with labor supply. And he personally said he's having a lot of kids to help it.
That's nice.
But I do think it's, are we going to get it from Africa? Are we going to get it from South America? I think we have to be thinking about that. Not that it's happening tomorrow, but it's not as far away. This last labor shortage, I think, highlighted it.
Yeah.
Teresa, I think some of that is like it's people, like the sheer number of availability, right? But then upskilling is going to have to get really, really
productivity and productivity companies, or we're all the economies are going to shrink if we can't find people.
I would say we have no choice but Africa, India. Just look at the demographics. Where is the young populations? There's so many of these developed countries that have top elderly demographics, and that's going to be the biggest problem of all, including China. So I think Africa and India are perhaps the only real option in that regard.
Well, Florida, where Doug is.
And Florida and the Musk home. Yeah.
And Africa is really interesting. If you look at that, the top three markets there, you've got South Africa, very developed. You've got Nigeria, and then Kenya is coming right behind it right now with incredible talent that's available.
Great universities.
And that fantastic universities. And it also speaks to the point I made earlier, but we also have to look at what are those macroeconomic trends? What are those political, economic, legal things that are there now? And we need to take a future view of that and look and say, what are we going into? How do we work with labor? What's acceptable in those markets? How are we in the conversation around policy and advocacy? Those are some future things that could be in that next conversation as well.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. I agree. And I think I wrote an article on this recently about immigration and inflation. And there's two ways to get rid of wage inflation. One is to slow down demand or crush the economy, or the second is to keep the demand going and just keep feeding us with more talent, right? And that's I'd rather go the second route, but what's up?
I said more supply, right? If either
demand
needs to come down, and supply needs to come up.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Which means we never get to retire.
It's going to help, so we can send the work to the people, right? Instead of sending the people to the work. That's going to be a big, big help in sending the work to Africa.
Yeah. Jason, did you say that means you're going to retire?
Yeah, the way to increase supply is to make sure none of us retire. That's why Doug's so worried about my health.
I am. You look good.
That's why the stock market's going down.
Although I did want Teresa to retire. Just I got to go on record on that.
What's the plan? We have a plan.
I have no comment.
You're the smart one between us.
I think you guys came up with some really good topics to end this conference and this call with. Thank you so much for today, and I think hopefully everyone found this enlightening. And I love that we're doing this. I think it's important.
Yeah, I saw a lot of great comments.
I'll join your council.
Were you following the comments? I think a lot of great comments from people about MSP and suppliers, and that would be a good topic too. Like, how does that relationship keep evolving? Mm-hmm. But whoever's putting those out there, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jason.
For the next one. Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Great. Bye.